Hey, so for chapter 8, we've been put in a situation where we have to do layoffs. We have to pick between whether we lay off the older, more experienced workers based on performance, or to lay off based on loyalty and seniority, which would cause um, some protected groups to be laid off. And I think that the challenge is that you can't really do one, because if you just do one, then you'll be put in a big predicament either way, whereas you'll lose a big part of your workforce that gave years of their life and loyalty. And that could also create tension for the newer employees, because if the newer employees see older, more experienced employees getting laid off, that might take away some of their job security or their sense of job security. However, if you lay off the protected class, all the newer workers, well, that sets up legal issues where you could be sued. So, um, I don't really see it as black and white. Um, I think that you can do both. I think that you can find some of those older white workers who might be loyal, but maybe they're not working as hard as, some of the newer people. And I think that just because you're loyal, it doesn't necessarily mean that you deserve to be in the company. So I could definitely see um, some of the older workers being laid off without it being too big of a problem. And, um, you know, I think that you also can afford to, um, lay off some of the newer people, especially if you can present a reasonable argument um, as to why. Now, if they're performing very well, that would be a huge problem. But if you're able to say that they just don't have the experience, that might work too. But ethically, I do think it would be a little on the safer side, just to lay off some of the lazier older workers who might just feel like they um, have kind of been grandfathered into the system where they don't really have to work as hard because of their experience. Um, I think that most managers would, well, I'm going to say what I would do because I think it's what most managers would do too. So I'm going to give kind of the same answer. What I would do is I would determine my criteria for the different ratios of protected class employees that I need. Sort of like how you need that whenever you're selecting workers, I would also use that in laying off workers. So I would have a proper balance of people that I'd be laying off as to where I would still meet the expectations for a different race, and still be able to lay off enough people where you can kind of trim the fat with some of the older workers that aren't working as hard, that may be older white males, and being able to lay off some of the protected class workers too. And I think that having a balance of both is probably the best way to go about it. And I also think that it would be the best way to minimize lawsuits is if when you're laying people off, the first thing you consider is your racial demographics and the numbers that go along with that. And if you're able to match those numbers enough where you can find the right people to lay off, I think that will minimize any potential lawsuits. Um, a couple questions that I have in this are there ways to lay people off where you're not actually firing them or right sizing, but can you just reduce their pay to the point where if you give them a huge pay cut, they'll basically feel forced to leave? I don't know the legality behind that. Um, I know that happened to somebody that I knew. They cut his pay by 40% and put him in a position where he had to leave. Um, so that's something I wonder. Can companies lay people off where they cut their pay significantly enough that they just leave the company? Um, I can see that happening as sort of a slimy way to not technically lay somebody off, but put them in a position where they don't really have a choice. The other question that I have about this is, let's say you did lay off mostly protected class workers and you ended up having skewed balances with what races you have working for you. Are you able to have mostly male workers if you immediately after laying people off start hiring back the protected class? Um, I personally don't think so. It's probably just in the moment. If you don't have the right demographics, you could get sued. Um, so that's why I wouldn't really want to take my chances with that. I just think that it's probably best in this situation to have a balanced approach and just kind of pick from both protected and non-protected class. Um, I think that would be the best way to minimize any possible legal trouble, too. Thanks.